Hello, my name is Dan Dyck, and you're listening to Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives, a show about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. I do a lot of the work for this program from home, but I do visit the MHA to meet program guests and to access records that aren't online. When I was there a few weeks ago, a couple walked in with a box full of documents to donate. That made me think. What led them to donate these records, and what happens to these items after that? So, I've invited archivist Conrad Stoesz into the studio to talk about what goes on behind the scenes at the MHA. Hi, Conrad. Welcome here.
Hi, Dan.
Why do people want to donate their histories to the MHA?
When someone comes to the archives with materials, we get to know the donor and the materials. I ask who they are, what kind of records they have, what's in the box. And they'll show me some things that they think are kind of interesting. And then I ask, what is your connection to these records? Maybe they created it, or maybe it's an ancestor that created these records. We are a Mennonite archive, and we are a community archive. So we collect things that shed light on the Mennonite experience. We are a national and international archive. Some archives are very focused on a specific region, an area, a town, or a province. We are an inter-Mennonite facility. Some archives are focused on one denomination, but we have records from many denominations. We like getting diaries and journals, photos, correspondence from individuals, families, organizations, businesses, denominations, and congregations. And we don't know what questions the future will ask of the past, so that in the present, we collect widely. At one time, history is told from the viewpoint of major events and the leaders during these events. Later on, there was more interest in everyday life, not just the leaders, but of the everyday person. What was it like to be a farmer, or a mother, or a child in a particular time and place? Women's history has become more important, and so the archivists of the past collected records that are now used to answer some of these questions.
Do you accept digital records like computer files?
We prefer originals because there's something special about the original as opposed to a copy or a scan. We have some digital-born materials, and that is increasing. And sometimes we create digital records, scans of photos or of documents to send to researchers or to post online. But it does mean that we're keeping, storing, and managing two versions of the record.
What are the challenges of preserving digital material, especially native digital material?
Yeah, that's a good question. Digital records are great for access and manipulation, but for long-term preservation, it's a bit of a headache. So sometimes we've had things that have come in, but we don't have that program anymore. And so that's on one level, just accessing records. You can't look at the records like you do a piece of paper and make an assessment of this is important or not. You have to be able to open the document. But there are things like digital rot. Things go bad after a while. And the whole thing with digital records is an issue with archivists around the world that we're still trying to grapple with because it takes a lot of extra resources to manage digital records.
What's an example of a really unusual item that someone has donated to the MHA?
The vast majority of our records are unique. The only place they exist are in this archive. So I could say everything, but I know that's not exactly what you're getting at. We have a doll that was used to smuggle money out of Russia in 1927. We have photos of a fact-finding mission to Ukraine during the famine that started MCC, Mennonite Central Committee. And I brought in some stereoscope pictures.
Ooh, what is that?
This is a stereoscope, so it's not a machine.
Is this like an early version of a ViewMaster?
Yeah, that's right. But it shows pictures in 3D.
Oh, how cool is that?
If you take one of these images, so I'm holding up a card that's, looks like the size of a check. And on this paper, it's on a stiff backing, there's two images that are exactly the same image, but twice. And so what you do is you put this on this holder, and then you look through the viewfinder, and the viewfinder has this board between the two slots for your eyes, making your eyes focus separately on each image. And then you can move that image back and forth, and you get a bit of a 3D effect to it. There's a holder on the bottom that swivels down.
This pointy thing looks like it can jab me in the
That
mouth
pointy
or
thing is what
something.
you grab onto.
Oh.
Pull it down.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
That's a handle.
Yeah, that's right.
Ah,
And then there's a small handle underneath the picture.
right.
Then you move it back and forth, and you get a bit of a 3D effect to it.
Oh, interesting.
I have to use my imagination a little bit, to be honest. But
As do I.
so these pictures are from 1907. So the form itself, the stereoscope, is interesting. But what is more interesting for me is what the pictures are of. These pictures come from the village of Einlage, Ukraine. And this village doesn't exist anymore, but not in the way you may think. This village was flooded purposely in 1927. When they created the new hydroelectric dam, the village was inundated with water. And so all the buildings had to be evacuated. And now they're under several meters of water. And so these pictures are of what the Einlage village was before that flooding took place. And I've seen videos of divers who have gone to the old Einlage location in the wintertime. They're on the ice and they go underneath the ice and they shoot video of these buildings that still exist in this old Einlage village.
That's very interesting. People donate all kinds of materials, from paper documents to vinyl records and audio and videotapes and more. Can you walk me through the process of what has to happen to make these materials accessible?
Sure, I can. Maybe the best way to do this is actually to take you to the archives where I can show you.
Terrific. Let's get at it. Okay, when you first visit the archives, you're going to see a front desk, and you're going to see somebody sitting behind that front desk, and most often it's this guy.
Hi, Dan. My name's Graham. I do a little bit of everything here, but primarily my job is to keep things moving as smoothly as possible and supporting the work that Conrad does.
Okay, so we're in a big room with some tall windows. It's full of shelves of newspapers and books and tables and some unusual equipment. This is the first room visitors see when they come to drop off donated materials. What happens next, Conrad?
Well, we get to know the donor and the creator of the records. And through that conversation, we talk about what is here, what is their wishes with the material. If we don't want material, do they want it back? Are there sensitive materials in here? And if so, what are they? And then there's a form that we fill out that gives it some of that information, the contact information for the donor, background of the materials, who created the materials. And the form also is a way of us receiving the materials as a transfer. So the donor is giving up rights and privileges of the materials and giving it to the archives.
Somebody's got to determine if these records are worth keeping. Tell me a little bit about that process.
It's a mix of things. Things like, well, how much time do I have? Meaning how big of a collection I work on. What skills are available at this point? If I give it to a project worker, do they have the language skills that are needed for this project? Do they have the expertise, the experience working with this project or that project? Are there researchers that want access to this material?
You said sometimes a donor will come in and drop off materials and they just don't want to see it again. Have you ever discovered treasures in those kinds of donations?
Yeah, numerous times. The Mennonites in Ukraine, Imperial Russia, had an agreement, a privilegium with the Tsar. And in 1919, I believe it was, the document was stolen. Then a few years ago, someone came in with a box of school materials. But in there was a document from 1860, and it was a copy of that privilegium from 1800. So this is an early copy of that very important document that was just tucked into these school materials.
Somebody organizes this information and does something with it to make it easier to find. How does that process happen?
I go to the computer and I have a program where I enter the information that I have on that form and I give it an accession number. And then we create what we call a finding aid that organizes the material, that gives contextual material to the creator, to the records, to help understand the records and what it's about. And it's that finding aid that gets then searched online. So the words we use are very important there so that when people do keyword searches that the record comes up.
The finding aid has been created. The boxes and the files within them have been numbered. Then what happens to those boxes and materials?
All right, then they go to live in our vault.
Let's take a look.
So this is a large room. It's got banks of shelves. And if you take all the paper that we have in the archives in this vault and in our lower vault, you stack it on top of each other, it's over 600 meters of paper. It's higher than the CN Tower, over half a kilometer of paper. So if people complain about paperwork, I say I got paperwork too. Over here we have filing cabinets that have pictures in it that have been described and that are on our website. We have map cabinets over there for large items. We have oversized section for photographs that don't fit in a filing cabinet. We have a special section for glass negatives. We have over 5,000 hours of audio recordings and audio-visual materials like films, VHS tapes, beta tapes, that type of thing.
Okay, we're back in the studio now. Thanks for that whirlwind tour, Conrad. I have a few more questions before we wrap up. Are there places where Mennonite archives are currently endangered?
Yeah, there are. And the first one that comes to mind are Mennonite materials that exist in Ukrainian archives. With the war now in Ukraine, these materials are threatened. The war isn't just about land and resources. It's also about identity. Russian forces are in fact targeting Ukrainian memory institutions like libraries and archives because these are nodes from where Ukrainian memory and identity is sourced. There's been over 300 libraries and archives that have been damaged or demolished since the beginning of the war.
Are there places where new Mennonite archives have recently started up?
Yeah, the newest one that I know of is that there's a Mennonite archive in Manitoba Colony, Mexico, and there's some archives in Paraguay that are becoming more accessible. So yeah, there are a growing number of Mennonite archives.
Have any of the collections at the MHA ever served to reunite separated families?
That is something that happens sometimes during wars. Families get separated. I'm also aware of another example where in the mid-1880s, here in Manitoba, Mennonite Brethren evangelists came to southern Manitoba and they drew its first members from existing established Mennonite churches. But to become a member of the MB Church at that time, you needed to be rebaptized. So changing churches was one thing, but to be rebaptized said that the established church was invalid. So this first rebaptism of 6 adults took place in the Dead Horse Creek near Winkler on May 30th, 1886. And some of those getting baptized were concerned that their family members would show up and violence would break out. In the end, there was no violence, but there was a division in the family. Then, 3 or 4 generations later, family members came to the archives to do family research, wondering what happened to the rest of the family. There had been a break. Siblings didn't talk to each other anymore, and that gap between the families grew over time. So they came to the archives, and we were able to put that family back together and got that researcher in contact with branches of the family they didn't know existed.
How is the MHA supported and funded?
We have 3 owners who support the archives: Mennonite Church Canada, Centre for Transnational Mennonite Studies, and Canadian Mennonite University. We raise over 25% of our budget through donations from individuals, and others include the Mennonite Heritage Archives in their will. If we get enough of these larger estate gifts, the interest they generate can be really helpful for us.
Can you share with our listeners some names of people who have used the MHA's resources for a public project like a book or a film or an exhibit?
Filmmaker Andrew Wall has used the archives for the production of Fallen Dam. Filmmaker Dale Hildebrandt has used the archives for the film Where the Cottonwoods Grow. Authors Sandra Birdsell and David Bergen have used the archives for their books. Playwright Armin Wiebe has used the archives. But in addition to some of these very public examples, there's also courts who have used the archives, and policymakers, family historians. Because the archives are used by so many people that benefit society generally, we can say that everyone in society is a secondary user of archives. Everyone benefits because the playwright, the lawyer, the filmmaker accessed the archives.
Well, there's certainly a lot going on here that I didn't know about, Conrad. Thanks so much for the sneak peek behind the scenes at the MHA.
Thanks, Dan. It was my pleasure.
In an upcoming episode, we're going to give you a brief history of Mennonite dancing, or rather what Mennonites call circle games. Thanks to the Tales team of Conrad Stoesz, Graham Unruh, and Kaylee Dyck for their work on the program. I'm your host, Dan Dyck, Tales from the Mennonite Heritage Archives. We'll be back soon with more stories about people, places, and events from Mennonite history. Thanks for listening.